Visitation. In the year following the impact of Comet Johnson-Smith and the extensive damage it caused during the Syrian offensive, strange occurrences began in the areas between a severely affected Jerusalem and the West Bank, starting at the Temple Mount. The morning and evening sacrifices were still being performed regularly at the Third Temple in Jerusalem. It was after one of the evening sacrifices that some luminous spheres, like ball lightnings, appeared in the air. They seemed to emerge from nowhere east of the Temple Mount, coming from the Mount of Olives, and then usually flew westward. A report quickly spread from young people who had suddenly seen two of these spheres passing overhead. Both spheres began circling each other in the sky, then one of them disappeared. The other paused, word in the air, drew closer, and a blinding beam struck a young woman in the chest. She screamed, staggered, and within seconds her face turned deathly pale. Her circulation collapsed, and she fell gasping to the ground. "She's losing consciousness," someone shouted, but before help could arrive, another beam ripped through the group. A man clutched his temple. He, too, had been hit. His blood pressure plummeted so rapidly that he staggered to his knees. His skin turned ashen, his lips and fingernails bluish. Beads of cold sweat appeared, typical of circulatory shock. Those who weren't hit ran screaming down the slope. Such incidents occurred repeatedly in less densely populated areas around Jerusalem. In the little West Bank village of Mikmaz near Jerusalem, with its stone houses clinging to the slope like pale barnacles, similar things happened. It was just after dusk when the first light appeared, small, amber, hovering low above the olive groves. At first, some shepherd boys thought it was a drone. But it made no sound. Then a second sphere emerged from behind the ridge. The two lights flickered, pulsating softly, as if communicating. One ascended higher, steady and watchful. The other descended. Witnesses would later say the beam was not a beam in the ordinary sense. It was narrow, almost needle-thin, bluish-white at its core, surrounded by a faint reddish halo. It shot downward without warning and struck an elderly man who had stepped outside his courtyard. He did not scream at first. He simply froze. The light held him for perhaps 3 seconds. When it withdrew, he collapsed against the low stone wall. His daughter reached him within moments. There was a small, circular mark just below his collarbone, no larger than a coin, darkened at the center, as if cauterized. His skin had already lost color. His pulse was thready, barely perceptible. "He's freezing," she cried, though the night air was still warm. Within minutes, he began trembling violently. His blood pressure dropped so abruptly that he drifted in and out of consciousness. When neighbors tried to lift him, he vomited and complained of a burning sensation inside his chest, like fire under the ribs. Above them, the second sphere moved closer. A red glow washed over the rooftops. Chickens scattered. Dogs howled. Another flash, this time directed toward a group of young men who had gathered near a parked pickup truck. One of them staggered back as if punched. He pressed his hand to his sternum. When he pulled it away, there was no blood, yet his fingertips were smeared with a thin, pinkish fluid that seemed to seep from pores rather than from a wound. His breathing became rapid and shallow. Cyanosis tinged his lips. Within minutes, he was unable to stand. The objects remained overhead for perhaps 5 minutes longer, drifting soundlessly over the valley before accelerating vertically and vanishing into the darkening sky. By midnight, 4 villagers were in critical condition. All exhibited similar symptoms: sudden hypertension, pallor, extreme weakness, small circular lesions, and an inexplicable drop in hemoglobin levels by the time they reached the hospital. Word spread quickly through the surrounding communities. In the days that followed, farmers refused to tend their fields after sunset. Some claimed the lights returned, hovering at the edge of visibility, watching. The Ministry of Defense of the Provisional Government decided to form an interim commission to investigate the aerial phenomena. It consisted of half a dozen scientists from the Hebrew University, 2 Air Force officers, and a representative from the Domestic Intelligence Service. The commission had portable cameras, a few vehicles, drones, and instructions to document anything unusual. Reportedly, the group operated from a makeshift bunker beneath the old government complex in West Jerusalem. From there, they received radio messages from the outskirts, and they gathered accounts from eyewitnesses, medics, and soldiers, who spoke of bright lights and injured people. Some drone footage did indeed show spherical objects of light moving in irregular paths over the countryside, sometimes in groups, sometimes individually, as if searching. An internal report, which was never published, spoke of unconventional energy discharges of unknown origin. Few people struck by the mysterious lights died instantly. Most survived in a state of excruciating weakness, unable to move as if their bodies had lost all their life force in seconds. The attacks mostly targeted people traveling alone. The victims trembled, complained of racing heartbeats, and excruciating pain in their chest and limbs. Doctors who later examined the survivors found alarming lab results. Hemoglobin levels plummeted to a third of normal, as if the patients had lost a lot of blood within minutes, leaving them pale with their skin taking on a ghostly pallor that made veins stand out like faint blue rivers under translucent flesh. Red blood cell counts were decimated, mirroring a catastrophic internal hemorrhage without any visible wounds. Lactate levels in the blood skyrocketed, a stark indicator of severe tissue damage and metabolic chaos, as if the body's cells were starving for oxygen and screaming in silent agony. White blood cell counts fluctuated wildly, some elevated in futile immune response, others suppressed, hinting at a deeper suppression of the bone marrow's ability to regenerate. Some victims exhibited pinpoint hemorrhages under the skin. Tiny red spots blooming like a macabre rash across their arms, legs, and torsos, while others suffered ruptured capillaries in their eyes, turning the whites a vivid crimson, as if invisible forces had burst the fragile vessels from within. The sclerae were injected with blood, giving survivors a haunted, demonic gaze that unnerved even seasoned medics. Several complained of a persistent metallic taste in their mouths, sharp and acrid, like licking rusted iron, which lingered for days and suppressed their appetites entirely. Nausea followed, not the retching kind, but a deep-seated queasiness that made swallowing impossible. Headaches pounded relentlessly, described as vice-like pressure behind the eyes or at the base of the skull, often accompanied by vertigo that left victims staggering or bedridden, their worlds spinning in disorienting loops. The skin lesions were perhaps the most baffling and terrifying. They began with an intense hyperemia, a fiery redness in the affected areas, typically the chest, neck, or face, as if a targeted beam had seared the epidermis without charring it. Unlike burns from fire or scalding water, these formed no blisters. There was no weeping fluid, no suppuration or infection to follow. Instead, the skin darkened rapidly, turning a deep, unnatural brown within hours, contrasting sharply with untouched flesh. A slight burning sensation persisted, not excruciating but insistent, like a low-grade fever localized to the wound. Hair in the vicinity fell out in patches, leaving bald spots that itched faintly as follicles died off. Days later, the epidermis peeled away in thin, flaky sheets, revealing raw, hypersensitive layers beneath. And there, at the epicenter of each lesion, doctors discovered the hallmark. 2 tiny punctures, close set like needle pricks, forming small papules that faded after some days but left indelible scars in the survivors' minds. Systemic weakness was universal, a weakness that sapped strength from limbs, making even lifting an arm feel like hauling lead weights. Shortness of breath plagued many, a labored gasping as if their lungs were half filled with invisible fluid, though x-rays showed nothing. Dizziness and a profound fatigue set in, confining victims to beds or hammocks, their bodies rigid in moments of crisis, necks stiff and eyes rolled back. Everything indicated that the light globes didn't kill outright but trapped people in a liminal torment. Contorted with pain, bloodless and drained, hovering at death's threshold but denied release, as if some malevolent force had siphoned their vitality drop by drop. Survivors recounted the attacks with eerie consistency, a sudden bluish or greenish beam piercing night or daylight, entering through windows or open doors, paralyzing them in their sleep. They couldn't scream, couldn't move a muscle, not from fear alone, but a total neuromuscular lockdown, as heat built unbearably in their bodies. Joseph Skach, the Jewish man with Czech roots, also learned about the strange attacks in the greater Jerusalem area. A peculiar sense of unease settled over him. He involuntarily recalled a book he had once come across as an archivist. It bore the title Vampiros Extraterrestres na Amazonia, written by the Brazilian biologist Daniel Ribiso Gizzi. In this book, The author describes the mysterious events happening in late 1977 over the Brazilian island of Colares in the Amazon estuary. At that time, countless residents reported seeing luminous objects in the sky, sometimes spherical, sometimes disc-shaped or cylindrical. These luminous bodies often flew at low altitudes, passing silently over rivers and mangroves, and some seemed to rise directly from the water. At night, and sometimes during the day, they directed blinding beams at people. Those who were hit described a sensation as if their blood was being sucked out, an experience that gave the phenomenon its folk name chupa-chupa, literally sucker-sucker. Doctors who later examined the injured found striking patterns, similar to the ones observed in Israel: sudden pallor, circulatory collapse, pinpoint skin lesions, and a drastic drop in hemoglobin. Some patients suffered from internal bleeding, ruptured capillaries in the eyes, and debilitating exhaustion that lasted for days. The Brazilian military had officially launched an investigation called Operação Proto. But even that investigation had brought no certainty. To Joseph Scatch, one thing was certain, though: the phenomenon occurring over Jerusalem bore an eerie similarity to what had happened in Brazil in the year 1977. Scatch recognized the same rhythm of the phenomena, the same incomprehensible cruelty that was now unfolding over Jerusalem. One night, Scatch had a dream. In his dream, he saw beings of smoke and light which had come to inflict agony on people. Their faces were human, their hair long, they had metallic armor, and they had tails with spikes, and the wings of these creatures rattled like carts. The next day, he remembered seeing such beings in books on Near Eastern archaeology, where they were described as demonic beings, known to the Sumerians as Gertablilu, a word which in Sumerian means scorpion man. The beings he had encountered in his dream looked just like the ones in the books: human faces, long hair, a rear end like one of a scorpion, and a breastplate. For a week, he kept thinking about the strange dream he had had. Where did it come from? Was his subconscious, or whoever else, trying to tell him that the strange light phenomena were manifestations of these demons? A few days after his dream, Scatch decided to try sharing his thoughts with the officials of the investigating commission.